the Hingham School Committee meeting, February 12th, 2018 at 7:34 p.m. We do not have any minutes for approval at this meeting. We've had numerous budget sessions and other meetings and other work going on, so February 26th we'll have a long list of minutes to approve. Next on our agenda are questions and comments from the audience. The audience comments are always welcome as agenda items. I'm not going to say that tonight. We will occasionally take audience comments on agenda items. Does anyone have anything that's not on the agenda they wanted to bring to our attention tonight? Okay, thank you. Next, we are going to go slightly out of order and do student communications first due to some technology. So Emma Quilty's going to give a student report.
So last Thursday, our student council put together an assembly mentioning a few key points relating to our student body. Maggie Rosso Sr. shared about how Hingham High School is a unified champion school. A Special Olympics unified champion school motivates all students to create environments full of respect, dignity, and advocacy for students with intellectual disabilities. The criteria to become a school like ours is having a unified sports team, a youth leadership for students with disabilities and without, and a whole school engagement like the Polar Plunge, which is coming up on February 24th. Later in the presentation, Mr. Swanson introduced a local doctor, Katie McBride, who discussed the dangers of e-cigarettes. She passed the important messages and consequences of using an electronic device instead of a cigarette. Overall, Dr. McBride tried to say in the nicest way that there are no good things that come out of this addiction, so doctors do not recommend them. Next, the ADL, or Anti-Defamation League presidents, Sarah Green and Eric Rubino, shared an extremely important message on kindness that will be in this video. And then Kaylee Johannes ended it off with many other leaders in our school stating "I believe" speeches to change and restore the kindness in our school that had been taken away, and which will be seen in this video.
Here's Eric and Sarah from ADL talking about an important message.
Hello, Hingham High School. I'm Eric Rubino, and this is Sarah Green. Today we stand in front of you to deliver an important message to our student body, a message about kindness. This year, kindness seems to have been forgotten in too many situations. Our principal, Mr. Swanson, has addressed us multiple times about recent issues, and it seems some people are not getting the message. So here we are today addressing you as your peers. We agree with Mr. Swanson when he says such expressions of bigotry and prejudice are completely unacceptable and totally at odds with our values as a community.
However, to those students who will not put these words into practice, we encourage you to think about how your actions may affect others. You have no idea what someone is going through or what your actions could do to them. We ask you as students of Hingham High School to spread kindness, positivity, and to restore our school to a safe environment. We all deserve an environment free from hate and worry because a school should not function that way. Before you say something that you think could be hurtful, please stop and think first. Thank you. Thanks, Eric and Sarah. Next up, we have a couple students that want to make statements.
I believe that we can all do a better job to uphold our core values of respect and civic responsibility.
I believe that all the students at Hingham High School can unify and put an end to cowardly acts of racial commentary to reinforce the accepting and welcoming community that we are lucky to call our school.
I believe that celebrating Black History Month every February helps us honor historic leaders in our communities and helps us better stewards of our own rights and privileges.
I believe that we should be very proud of our MECO program, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. I believe that our MECO program enriches our school immeasurably.
I believe that displays of racism and hate are cowardly and despicable and do not represent who we are as a community.
I believe that is the responsibility of all of us to treat each other with respect and dignity.
I believe that we should all take care of each other because we are members of one Hingham community.
I believe that by making an effort to understand one another, we can make HHS into a more positive and supportive environment for everybody.
I believe that Hingham High School is a community in which love, respect, and diversity are celebrated and hate is never tolerated.
I believe that all HHS students are leaders and role models who should unite against hate and racism to create inclusivity.
I believe that the goal of Hingham High students should be to create a safe space where students explore their identities, or where we learn about respect, and where we are able to celebrate what makes each and every student unique.
All of these people and statements are standing up to any past, present, and future actions of hate, bigotry, and discrimination of any kind. Please keep these statements in mind as you go through your day-to-day lives at Hingham High, and please keep Hingham High a safe place for everyone to learn, grow, and feel accepted. If you support everything said up here, please stand up. Thank you. You can return to class.
And if anyone's interested in this video, you can find it on Mr. Swanson's Twitter. Thank you.
So that was a student-run assembly, the student council. So they organized the whole thing. The student council wanted the doctor to come to talk about vaping, and they organized everything. And so it was a great initiative for creating a better culture in the schools. So congratulations. I know you were involved too, right? You're on the student council? Yeah. Really great effort. So good. Well, thank you for the report. And now we'll go back to superintendent's report.
Thank you. You have two brief emails that are there. One is an email from Katie Roberts, the science director, and she is calling our attention to an award won by one of the high school science teachers, Jackie Beaupre. And for those of you who don't know Jackie is the bee lady. So she's been honored with the NSTA, National Science Teachers Association Award for newer teachers, and so that's quite an honor. She was nominated by Katie, and it is a national association, and she will enjoy a trip to the NSTA conference in March. There will be a formal press release that comes out that will tell more about the award. Unfortunately, she doesn't say where the NSTA conference is this year, and I hope it's somewhere other than Boston, but quite an honor anyway for that young lady, and someone we're very proud of, obviously. Oops.
I wish I could remember exactly where, because I did Google, and I found out that in addition to win the award, there's some no money to help pay for the trip, and they'll make available for her some, of the classes that should be attending. So it's quite impressive. If I'm not wrong, I think it's Atlanta. It is? Yeah, there you go.
Good. Okay.
Just didn't want to be wrong.
Thank you for that. It says here that Pam will, I wrote here yesterday that Pam would put the enrollment in this morning, but it's not here, but the monthly enrollment is only 2 students fewer than last month, so not a significant difference, and we'll put it in the packet, in the next packet. There's also an email in there from Derek that I thought you would like to see. He wrote it at the end of the first day of the SBIRT survey, the verbal screening tool. And in that first day, they were able to get through 50 students. They decided to use the subs to bring in a couple of subs so that the two trained nurses at the middle school could both participate in the screenings, and they might not do them all the same way. They also combined them with one of the typical screenings that they do on health issues, thinking that might make it a little less pointed and awkward for the students, and felt that it went very well. We guessed a bit about how many folks might opt out their children. At that point, I think she said there were 56 or so parents that opted out of the survey. I would have expected out of a class of 350 that it might be more, but it was not. And Rick's surveys at the high school will be on the 1st of March, start on the 1st of March. So it seems to be going well, and nothing that came as a result of any of these interviews that were held with kids, and so it seems to be something that is not a huge challenge to us in terms of time or money. The cost is relatively low. And the policy committee at the next meeting will take a look at the policy that we've been going by, which is one from another community, and see if we need to modify it some. And actually good to have had some experience before we write the formal policy, but that would be the next step. There is information in your packet about the upcoming kindergarten enrollment. The packets will be in the schools by this Friday and be ready to be picked up by parents the Monday after vacation. And then there will be a week-long period when they will be returned to the schools. And we're anxious, of course, for that, because we want to have a better sense of what the kindergarten enrollment will be, particularly checking about whether we'll need an additional class and how many students there are that are older. We, all of the principals have had at least one meeting already with parents. There probably are a lot of parents who we don't know about yet, who may not be aware of that, and I'm sending tomorrow a copy of a Education Matters column about the kindergarten registration. The theme of it is Welcome to the Hingham Public Schools, because we're aiming that information to parents that are first time through and don't know the typical routines. As well, we will send out a notice to all of the local preschools, again looking for those parents that are first time parents, first time kindergarten. And as well, we have a formal press release that will also go in the paper, and notices will go out from the 4 elementary schools. So we're making a real effort to find people that we haven't heretofore met in some cases. Many people we met at the forums. I think there was a fair percentage of those new parents who were at those forums, so that's a good thing, and we're counting on them as well to share the information. But the packets are there for anyone who's listening tonight or watching tonight. You can pick the packet up in the school your child will attend, and feel free to call this office if you're not sure about what the district lines are. And then you will return them during the week of March 12th through March 16th. And we will then hopefully have them all returned in a timely fashion. That will do 2 things. It will avoid any kind of a higher payment or tuition that parents would need to pay for sending things late, but also it will allow us to look at our budget needs and the total number of students. And the first week in May is when we actually make the assignments using the FTEs that we have that are budgeted to decide how many sections we will have and how big they will be, and that sort of thing. So important time of year, and this year especially because we have a new hope, and that is that people will think about enrolling their child the year that they are 5, because we believe for most children, not all, but for most children, that is the right time to enroll in kindergarten. Let's see, what else? You also have...
Question from Michelle.
Sorry.
Oh,
sorry,
I'm sorry.
I had a quick question. Was any of the language that we had determined around the appropriate enrollment age going to be in any of the packet information?
What you see here is not the complete packet. There's
okay.
a lot of information.
So there's another
Yeah, this is just a
okay.
sampling of the information that relates to when it's available, but packet is quite a large packet.
Okay, so it includes information about the...
Right, and they're,
okay.
and they are asked to add to it as well in terms of things that may come from the preschool health information for the child, so.
Okay, thank you.
Also in the packet, your packet, you have information from the most recent South Shore Education Collaborative Board meeting. You know, as is our practice, we put in the information about the updated budget, because of course we're all members of that collaborative. The updated budget and also the updated enrollment is there, and attention particularly to the special ed subcommittee, because they're the folks that would raise questions if any questions need to be raised. And there's another board meeting the Friday after the February vacation, so you'll see another one of those packets at that time. Lastly, and this is under communications, but just following along, I want to mention that there is a copy of the proposed annual report that goes in the town's annual report there. And a couple of people sent me suggested edits this morning, which was helpful. But if there are any other edits or suggestions, please get them to me by Thursday, because this needs to go to Town Hall on Friday.
Okay. Yeah, I was working on some, so I will send those to you. Anybody have comments on that, or no? Okay. All right, so we will take care of that. So then, first item of new business, public hearing on the fiscal 19 operating budget. So we, by statute, we hold a formal public hearing on the budget. And since we are right now in our meeting, not in a public hearing, and in a public meeting, it's a meeting of the board, and so we do not have to take public comment at that time, but in a public hearing, we hear whoever wants to talk to us, we open and listen. So I will call to order the public hearing of the fiscal 19 operating budget at 7:53 p.m. Do we need a motion to open the public hearing, or can we just call it to order?
I think we can just call it to order.
Okay. So we'll call it to order at 7:53 p.m. And Dr. Gallo is going to do a presentation of the administration's proposed operating budget, and then we'll open it to the public to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. And once again, most of you in this room have seen a lot of this before. I've reduced the slides yet again, but we do have the obligation to present to not only people who are here tonight who have not seen this, but also to the public at home. So we need to go through the facts and figures. There are some new numbers that you'll see at the end, so that's kind of a reward, especially since the new numbers are a little smaller than the last ones you saw. So just for background, this is our enrollment, growing, 600 students, 17.5% from 2005 to 2016, and you can see that peak year that was 2 years ago. This is our K-12 enrollment, and in addition to this, of course, we have students who are in the preschool program, and we also have some students who are out of district for special education reasons or in vocational schools. So just The high school and middle school continue to grow. That's why I've given them their own graphs, and you can see that the blue line there is the high school growing again. This year, the middle school was down slightly this year, that big bump having moved pretty much through there. Monthly, we do an enrollment chart like this one. This is the one for January, and the particular points to pay attention to get a sense of what's going to happen are the 5th grade number, which is in the lower right-hand corner, and the middle school number in the upper left-hand corner. And we have 324 students moving out of 5th grade into the middle school for next year. So 324 students coming into the middle school and then going out to the high school, 8th graders, 861. We believe that perhaps 20 of those students will go off to private school by our past kind of pattern. And as well, in moving from grades 6 to 7, we lose a few students because so many of our parochial schools in particular start at grade 7, and so some kids move out then. So that's what we have in terms of enrollment. Our kindergarten enrollment is kind of wavy at this point. There's not a pattern that's settled down, and that's going to be a really important number to watch. And as well, we aren't quite sure for this year what to expect in terms of kindergarten because of the focus we've made on having more of our 5-year-olds enter kindergarten at 5 rather than at 6, and we don't know what number or change, numerical change, that's going to produce. So overall, in terms of enrollment, 4,225 students. That was the January count. In the last 10 years, there's been a 12% increase. So that's 450 more students in the last 10 years. In terms of class sizes, which is highly important to parents, we currently have 1,900 students that are in our K-5 program. It's a 20.7 student average, and there are 92 sections in grades K through 5 across the 4 schools. 11 of those 92 are at 24 or 25, nothing higher than 25, and more of that 11 are at the 24 number rather than 25. That's a very good class size. Even looking back historically, that's a very good class size and pretty well balanced. So we're happy about that. At the middle school, there's 1,070 students. 26 of the 237 total core subject classes are at 25 higher. Core subjects would be math, science, social studies, English, foreign language. And we picked those because comparing and putting into the total things like physical education and band, subjects that are traditionally higher, would skew that. But in typical core academic classes, 26 of 237 are at 25 or higher. And 25 or higher means that some are at 26 and 27, and even maybe 1 or 2 at 28. So that's at the middle school. We keep track of that number from year to year, and it goes up and down as we are able to add staff or not. At the high school, 1,255 current students. There are 332 core subject classes in the high school, and 64 of those are at 25 or higher. And again, that could be 26, 27 in that number. And that number varies from one year to the next, depending upon our ability to add teachers, or more importantly, pieces of teachers in individual classes. So in addition to those students, the K-12 students here every day in our buildings, we also have responsibility for 70 preschool students. And of the 70 preschool students, 38 children have IEPs. And the preschool program is tailored to the needs of those children. But in addition, there are 70 preschoolers in all. Those other 3 and 4-year-olds, the 32 others, have parents who pay a tuition for them to attend that program. We have 49 students currently out of district in either residential or collaborative or private day schools. And we have 4 vocational students. So that's the picture of where we are in terms of enrollment. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but if you picked up a handout and you have this side, and it's different from the last time you saw it, for those of you who've seen it before, you can see the column to the right, and what we have done in that column that's been added out to the right is identify the places where we've been able to make reductions in the bottom line since we presented the first version of this back in early January. Actually, people received it just before New Year's. And so there has been, in that period of time, an ability to reduce the bottom line of the budget by $122,000, and most of that is because we've had changes in personnel. Could be a retirement that we didn't anticipate when we built the budget, which means there's a likely savings between the person retiring, that salary, and someone that we may hire as a replacement. So the budget now has a bottom line of $52,677,795. That's the black number in the middle of the bottom line of the column that was added. 52,677,795. That's where our proposed budget stands at the moment. And I would remind those of you who perhaps don't see these numbers very often that this is a budget that the administration has at this point proposed to the school committee. And the school committee will be making a final decision about what their budget will be. That will be proposed to the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee, and the Advisory Committee ultimately will make a recommendation of what dollars can be allocated for school needs, and that recommendation will go to the town meeting, and the town meeting has the ultimate decision. So that budget, overall budget, stands at 5.86% now. And it started out at 6.10%. So this is the original budget, just to give you an order of scope. And tonight, I'm not going to go through all of those pieces of pie. I'm going to focus mostly on the blue pie and the red pie, because you can see the other pieces aren't very big. The blue pie is regular ed instruction. That's what we call the 2300 account. And it is 52% of the entire budget. And the red pie looks like it's about a quarter, and it is. It's 24% of the budget, and that's the special education budget, and that's $12,607,660. The next biggest piece is the custodial and maintenance and utility and transportation, regular ed transportation is in another place, but the special ed transportation is in the red piece. And you can see the other parts, which I'll just read them quickly: the principal's offices, the counseling and health department, regular ed transportation, school committee expenses, vocational. Those are all very small pieces of the overall pie. And so the dollars are in the red and the blue, and interestingly enough, the red and the blue areas are the things that we're going to have to cut if we have to reduce this budget significantly from where it is, because those are the only dollars that are big enough to fill the gaps that currently exist. So more on that later. I'm going to go over this one quickly because I have something that's more readable that summarizes this information. But here are the things that we requested as new items in the budget. And they're all listed down the left-hand side according to the section of the budget, the function, we call it, where the dollars are. And so you can see that big function there about starting maybe about 20% the way down the page. That is the 2300 section of the budget, and that's a pretty big section. And if you look way down at the bottom of the page, there's a section that says S 2300B, and that's the special ed. Comparable section of staffing and other kinds of related instructional needs. So if we go to grouping those things in a way that make it more reasonable or readable, the sections here are what's in there for regular instruction, what we've proposed, and that's a total of 7.1 teachers. 2 of them are at the elementary, 1 being that kindergarten teacher that we may or may not need, and another being a teacher that it will allow us to keep the same number of sections that we have next year at one of the schools. Also, there are tutors. For 5 years, we've been requesting elementary math tutors to provide for kids that need more support in math. And so this represents 2 tutors in each of the 4 schools, and that is a personnel matter, so it's there. In special education, there are 3 teachers being recommended, 1 each at the middle and the high school, that will allow us to provide more co-taught classes. And the 3rd teacher that's in that category is for a small cohort of students who need some skills class instruction. So it's a small number of kids, but we have 1 skills class already at the middle school, but the numbers coming in make it seem to us at this point anyway that they can't all be accommodated in 1 class, and so this would be a 2nd skills class for a very, very small number of kids. We have some paraeducators in there. The dollar value of them is there, and these are for specific children for whom that kind of a service is provided in their IEP. And then we have a totally new item, which is to provide stipends for liaisons. And that would be a totally new role for us, for people who will help us with communication. We have so many different service providers and teachers and individuals in each of the schools to have better communication both within the school and between the schools, individual schools, and here, that we think this is worth a try to enhance that and provide stipends. So that will be posted. Somebody wrote the other day and said, "What's that job? I never heard of such a thing." Well, no, you haven't, because it's a new idea, and we would be posting that job and put a job description together, assuming that the budget supports it. And then counseling and other student support, we have it in the budget. An adjustment counselor, 2nd one for the high school, and most of you here got written information about exactly what that person would do. And then at the middle school, we really need both a guidance counselor and adjustment counselor, so we've left that open to, as the budget is passed and those things are funded or not, it would be up to Heather together with Rick to make the decision about one individual and which of these would best enhance the needs that we have later this spring. And so guidance or adjustment, you can make very good cases for both of them, but we think not realistic that we could get both of them this year. So those are the major categories, and you can see in the regular education staffing line, 58.81% of the budget that's being proposed, of the new items that are being proposed, not the whole budget obviously, but of this new category. 22.46% for special education, personnel-related services, and for counseling and other student support. There's some item in this 3rd category for materials for the social emotional task force to determine, and that's a total of 13.25%. There are some other sundry costs and items in that category of new things in the budget, the total value of which is $1.3 million, so not an insignificant number, but you can see there that they fit into some different categories, and they're listed there. They tend to be smaller items, but 5.5% of this 1.31 million is in that list of categories. Just a couple slides about special education. 464 students who are in our K-5 program, and middle and high school here every day. And then there are 4 students who are listed at the high school, and those 4 students are students who are with us beyond the graduation age, the 3 to 22 category. These are the 18 to 22-year-old students. They're in that number, but not in that number are those 38 pre-kindergarten children with IEPs, and they're out of the total of 70 3- and 4-year-olds that are at each school, and 49 out-of-district students. These are this year's numbers as we speak. And then looking at, this is a very big department, as you can imagine. On the left-hand side are the things that are under the 2300B account. So they're all under the special ed account, and these are all teachers or folks that have a caseload that involves direct services to children. And the 2 blue numbers are there and highlighted in blue, a half a teacher at Foster and a half a teacher at the pre-K that were added after last year's budget had closed, and because that's when we knew of the need. And we were able to fund those 2.5 teachers with IDA funds at that point. But because they weren't on last year's chart, we wanted to be sure that people understood that they were added. And down at the very bottom, the positions that are listed in green are the 1 skills class for the middle school and the 2 co-teaching classes that would be 1 at the middle school and one at the high school. And then on the right-hand side are things that are related to special education, and in most cases have some service delivery component, but are largely people in the area of psychologists and the early childhood coordinator and the leadership of the department in terms of the director and assistant director. In addition to all of those people who work for us, draw our salary from us, and work for us as employees, we also contract out some services, mainly hourly, but not all hourly. So they are listed there and are either a contract that we have with an individual or a contract that we have with an agency that provides an individual. Tuitions. We have 49 as we speak, and we're anticipating 51 tuitions for next year, and you can see the range: private day schools, private residential, SEIS, that would be a school like the Canton, the hospital school there, that's a public entity. We don't have tuitions for those students, but we have costs there, and what their services cost is taken out of the Chapter 70 money that the town gets from the state before we get that money. So, just summarizing what's in there for special education: the teachers, 3 teachers, the related services, which are the adjustment counselors, adjustment counselor or guidance counselor at the high school, and those liaisons for building liaison folks, stipends. And then the things that we added last summer are there again in the blue. So if you look at the budget, that same pie, same total value of the pie, but we divided up a bit differently, and we divided it into all personnel, which means we take the special ed people who are paid under special ed and put them with all of the other personnel that are in other sections of the budget. Then that's 83.5% of our total budget is in the personnel line. Now, that doesn't mean we're paying all teachers. Teachers are in there, but as well in there would be things like course reimbursement, dollars that teachers get paid for taking courses. Paraeducators are in there. Contracted dollars are in there. So when we say personnel, we don't mean all individual teachers. We mean the teachers, the support staff who are supporting the teachers in the program. The only people shouldn't say that. In addition to the people in the 2300 account, we also have in this category of personnel librarians who are not in the 2300 accounts, counselors who are not in the 2300 account, and librarians, and I think those are the major of course, all of our other folks, the bus drivers, the custodians, the secretaries, all the people that are part of our team here. And then in the red, we have contracts. Now, those could be contracts that are things such as the out-of-district place students. They could be vocational students. They could be contractors that we provide for other kinds of services in the maintenance areas and others. And then everything else, you know, the utilities and the books and the technology and the everything else is in that tiny little slice of green there. And therein lies the problem, and the problem being trying to keep up with the personnel costs, and the special ed cost doesn't leave a lot of room for the green things, and those costs go up more than 2.5% every year. That's just our reality. So this is just a summary of where we are at the moment. So if you go back to the tricolor budget that you have, if you look up in the top left, you can see where we started, 52,800,172. You can see to the right of that where we are in this year's budget. And excuse me, if you look in the middle, you can see the reductions, 122,377 of them, 87,591. Those reductions came from regular education, and 34,786 came from special education. Nothing came out of vocational. In fact, we've got one more vocational student now as a possibility that we didn't anticipate. We didn't change our budget for that because we have budgeted for 3 new folks. We have 4 possibilities, but we're willing to be risky and say we don't think all 4 of these young people will get in, but we didn't change that budget at all, but there is one more student than there was 2 weeks ago. And you can see the percentages there, and 5.86% as opposed to the 6.11%. So that's how we started and where we've gone and where we are at the moment. And this number, and we'll talk about this later, I think, in the meeting, but that number that's there, the new number for us, is incorporated in the forecast number that you will see, that you'll see later, and we'll talk about later in the evening. So that is the budget as it's proposed right now. We still have a long way to go in a very short time, because this committee is scheduled to vote on its adoption on the 26th, right after the break. So while it's a long way to go to get to a number that I think we can all live with, it's a very short time to do that, and a lot of things are happening this time of year. I even got today a retirement for next year. We're just trying to get this year underway, and somebody brought in a retirement to retire at the end of next year. So things it'll be very important for us to pay attention to whether or not there are any new retirements that will come along. Sometimes people like not to have to mention a retirement until it's imminent for any number of reasons, and that's certainly personal choice, but there may be some more of those. There are still a handful of people who are on leave this year that we haven't yet heard from in terms of whether or not they will return. And there's the state, what's happening at the state level. The forecast has a number, a projection, if you will, of what state aid will be. because certainly we count on things well beyond just what the town can provide. And I should mention in that context that the budget that we have here is a net budget. And that means that we get the input from the staff, from the principals particularly, and the directors, and they get input from their teachers, and we build a budget with real costs as we expect they will be. And then we are able to offset certain categories of the budget by things like grants and by things like fees and tuitions that are paid, things like athletic fees, and all of those are sources of revenue, not taxpayer revenue, but revenue, and they offset our budget. So this budget, if not for all of those sources of revenue, our budget would be $4,000 more than it is.
4 million.
4 million.
400,000, I'm sorry, 400,000 more.
No, 4 million. 4 million. $4 million.
All right, let's start over here. You're right, $4 million more. And most of that comes out of special ed because there are two larger grants that feed into the special ed budget. One of them is the IDEA grant, and that is federal funding. And the other one is the circuit breaker reimbursement grant, which is state reimbursement for tuitions. So those two things offset, and instead of our budget being 52 million and something, it would be 56 million and something, and so that's a good thing. So
Good.
I think that's it.
Does the school committee have any questions at this point from new information? Okay. So if anyone from the public would like to comment, I'd ask you to raise your hand, and then you will come to the microphone and state your name and address, and then give us your input. Anyone? No? No thoughts? Okay, well.
Sorry, can I change my mind?
Sure.
And ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, since no one else. Maybe I'll open up see if anybody else jumps in. So Dot, I was just noticing something as I was well, I've noticed it before, but I wanted to point it out. When we talk about the number of students in classes, in the core classes, is 25 sort of the ideal number that we're looking for?
Well, we have guidelines in the contract.
Okay.
But they're not cutoffs, they're recommended class sizes.
Okay.
So, and actually our elementary class sizes are well below those. At the secondary level, we have some that are higher. And it's not always because of not having sufficient staff. Sometimes it's a singleton. And if there are 27 students who want to take a particular course, advanced chemistry or some other particular course, that's not enough to have two sections, even if we had staffing for that. And so sometimes it's the nature of things. Sometimes it's that in the schedule you have enough staffing to offer two sections of, let's take advanced chemistry again, two sections of that, but because one of them has to back up against chorus, let's say, there's not a way to equalize those classes. So for some reason, sometimes it's just a matter of the schedule, the way it is. But
is the enrollment suggestion 25 though? I think
that's what we say is in the wording in the contract says if the class size exceeds a certain number, then we are supposed to be notified and again notify you, and that's why in the fall you get a sheet from the two elementary. So we have some classes that are way beyond those numbers, and in some cases when we talk about co-teaching, so we have a class that has a regular ed teacher in it, and we have a special ed teacher in that class as well. Well, what's the best way to get the best services for kids is for the regular ed class in a co-teaching situation to be a smaller class. I mean, great to have the special educator there as well, but special educator can be a lot more useful in a class of 23 or 24 than in a class of 27 or 28. So there's no question there are some, there's need for some classes that are more. So it may be one class, which means we'd hire a .2 teacher, or it may be that we hire a full-time teacher, but that person could teach 3 sections at the middle school and 2 at the high school, or vice versa. Right. So we can use FTE. So right now we've budgeted those people, those 5.1 positions as 5 people, but likely, particularly if we have to do some significant cutting, the way to do that would simply reduce the total number of sections, and then when the time comes, which is the first week in May, we divvy them up and divide them into the most, put them in the most serious situations.
That makes sense. The reason I was bringing it up, because there was at the Board of Selectmen Advisory meeting last week, there was some talk about enrollment, and enrollment seemed like they're sort of flattened out and whatnot, but I was noticing that because the high school enrollment continues to increase, that right now at the high school, almost 20% of the core subjects are more than 25 kids. Right. So I think when people are feeling like, oh, enrollment's really flattened out, but it's not flattened, it's increasing in the
and we have
where you
a
probably
large
want less
number
students, not more.
of core subjects, and we have a large number of electives, which is wonderful that we can offer so many things to kids, but pretty hard to balance them all.
Right.
And
goodness, I'm so sorry. That is so embarrassing. My son, a recent graduate.
Yeah, and Michelle just
and we didn't put in there all that was requested.
Yes.
Into the budget in terms of FTEs. So.
And at that same meeting, the advisory committee had asked about class size, and I sent to them, I believe I sent it to all of you, policy 5.4 and policy 5.5 in the school committee policy manual, which is on the website. It corresponds to class size, and there is a class size notification limits of indicating when class sizes are deemed undesirable and considered a severe overcrowding. And so depends on the grade level and the type of class, because laboratories and certain electives have smaller numbers just because of the nature of the classroom. Gym class is a different size.
And lab sciences are supposed to be limited to 24, 6 pods, if you will, with 4 students in each one. So in terms of the use of equipment and so on, that's the desirable.
Right.
Liza, one of the things that also was brought up at the meeting last week with the advisory and the Board of Selectmen, one of the elected officials questioned when Dr. Gallo did her presentation, which, by the way, was he did a fantastic job. The official asked about, whether students overall are not getting service because of, not having the proper resources, and your answer was yes. Tonight we will have a nice presentation by Dr. Green, and I just want to call to the viewers at home to be cognizant that, while we are discussing the budget and we may thinking about reducing one item or the other, the study done by the BU students will validate that the social-emotional needs number of students went way up. So we have to have that in mind as we're talking about, the budget being a certain percentage for special ed. Now we have a new element being added to this. So I just want people to be cognizant of that, and when we deliberate, whether to reduce or not a particular item.
Okay.
And that's, I think the major point there is that people don't tend to think of staffing except in terms of numbers. And It's very easy. If you know you have 100 more children, you'd expect that you'd have, 4 or 5 more teachers. But if you have the same number of children, the number doesn't grow, but the needs that those children have are different or grow. 20 years ago, we didn't have adjustment counselors. Well, now we can't imagine life without them. The needs of children change. We have, in addition to the students, about 600 students who have an IEP, and that's a combination of the kids that are in district and out of district. We also have, Heather, maybe 230 or so, 223, some number in there, of children with 504 plans. Now, some of them need services, accommodation services, not as significant dollars, particularly for an individual child, but nonetheless need services, and often it means needing more aides in a classroom or other kinds of people help, or simply time and energy and special planning and all of that. So I think very few of you in this room went to school when there were those kinds of needs every day in our schools.
Okay. So we can segue into the next thing. I'm going to adjourn the open meeting, or the hearing, public hearing at 8:31 p.m. We're going to go back to our open meeting, and now we're going 6.2. We're going to receive a report on the Hingham Tiered System of Support Survey and the district results from Jennifer Green, who's an associate professor at the BU School of Education, who helped with this research, and Dr. Jamie LaBillois is also going to introduce it. And I would like to make a note to the audience and to the public at home. We're only going to take school committee questions tonight. There's lots of opportunity for public input. There are going to be meetings at all of the schools during the day and in the evening, and the administration is open for comments. That we are merely receiving a report tonight on this. We're not taking any action. And we also have several other things on our agenda. So we have a packed agenda, so just wanted to give the heads up. So.
Sure. So just as Dr. Green prepares for the presentation, I want to give the committee a bit of an overview of the work and sort of what brings us here this evening. Last year, we formed the Hingham Tiered Systems of Support Social and Emotional Task Force, which is comprised of 27 members. And the co-chairs are myself, Brenna Rogers, who's here, and Heather Rodriguez. And if I could just ask in the audience, if you're one of the 27 members of the task force or the 14 parent ambassadors, you please stand, just so the committee has a sense of the cross-disciplinary group that is here this evening to support Dr. Green's presentation. Thank you. I will note that the Hingham Education Foundation funded this study, which really had an aim to establish for us a baseline of student functioning as well as teacher perception and community perception, but also begin to give us information relative to our needed Tier 1 programming. So that is the programming that all of our kids get prior to having some kind of difficulty or challenge. Similarly, we want to have a better sense of what are the needs of our student population. So as our counseling and support staff begin to develop evidence-based practices and interventions, that we actually knew the areas in which we wanted to develop that work. We also wanted to have a better understanding of the perception of our students, parents, and teachers towards this work as we begin implementation. So at this point, I will introduce Dr. Jennifer Green, who is an associate professor in special education and a child clinical psychologist. Her research focuses on the roles of schools in serving children with emotional and behavioral disorders, and she's particularly interested in how teachers can contribute to facilitating early identification of students who may benefit from mental health services as one way to reduce disparities in mental health service access. Dr. Green also studies bullying and specializes in assessing bullying and determining how assessments can be used to inform school safety planning. She has collaborated with a number of school districts and local schools to provide feedback on student mental health and bullying experiences. She completed her doctorate at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Prior to joining BU, she trained at the Yale School of Medicine and in the Department of Healthcare Policy at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Green is the co-director of the Social Adjustment and Bullying Laboratory at the Boston University School of Education, and we had a wonderful experience working with her and her team. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Green to present the results of our survey.
It was completely mutual. I really have enjoyed the work with the task force, and all of the feedback and input that I've gotten has really strengthened this work. So it's been a pleasure being here in the district. And as you'll see, there's a lot of work that went in from individual schools and school leaders to collect the data that I'll be presenting today. I have a number of students who have been working on this project as well, so I just want to acknowledge their support. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the background on student mental health generally and what we know from national data. I'll talk about administration of the surveys that we did here in Hingham. I'll share the main results and then take, or not, questions and discussion as I'll follow your lead on that. So just some national context. We know from national data that approximately 40% of U.S. children and adolescents experience an emotional or behavioral problem each year. So this is to say that problems like anxiety and depression and ADHD are very common among children and adolescents across the board. And when I'm talking tonight about the Hingham results, I want to talk about them in the context of what we know nationally about children's mental health. We know from national data that problems increase in adolescents, especially anxiety and depression. And you'll see a similar pattern when I get to the Hingham results, but this is an expected pattern because we know from national data that there's this increase into adolescence and young adulthood. We also know that the most common problem that youth experience is anxiety, and that anxiety is increasing nationwide among children and adolescents, and adults too. And that for about 8% of all youth, and estimates range from about 5 to 10%, their emotional and behavioral problems are severe and significantly interfere with their daily functioning. So there's a larger population who experience some anxiety or depression or ADHD or behavior problems, but a smaller percent where these problems significantly interfere with their ability to go about their school life and their daily life. We also know that emotional and behavioral problems are associated with trouble with schoolwork, missing school, and difficulty sustaining and building relationships. There's some recent data that shows that even after school, children who've had an emotional or behavioral disorder will have lower lifetime earnings throughout their adulthood, so we know that these have a lasting impact. We know that with support, students can do quite well, and that there are a number of evidence-based interventions that can work very well to supporting students with emotional and behavioral disorders, yet nationally, so again, this is national data, only about 1/3 of youth with emotional and behavioral problems receive counseling supports and services. So we know that there's a significant gap between youth who need or could benefit from these services and the youth who actually get connected to any kind of counseling, therapy, psychology services. So the survey results that I'm presenting today were conducted at the request of this task force that is here. And the objectives were to assess student social and emotional needs, to identify their use of social and emotional services and supports, and to determine where there may be gaps in support provision or service provision. The ultimate goal is to develop a tiered system of support here in Hingham, and the idea is that many school districts that I work with find that they provide just those tertiary services, so just those tier 3 services to the students with the most significant emotional and behavioral needs, which tend to be reactive and crisis-oriented services. And school districts, including Hingham, are increasingly moving towards providing a continuum of supports and services to all students, with the idea of having fewer students who need those more intense crisis services and more students who are getting less intensive services and who are identified early and receive the supports that they need, so that as districts, we're not waiting for students to need to be in crisis to get connected to services and supports. And we're providing them early on and providing tier 1 or services across all students, tier 2 services for students who need it more, and then a smaller percent of those tier 3 services, again, to about 8% of the student population. The surveys here were administered to students in grades 4 through 12. So when you're looking at the results, keep in mind that the elementary school results are just for grades 4 and 5. They were completed online, completed in schools. All teachers in all grades completed reports. So teachers starting at pre-K all the way through grade 12 completed surveys, either in or after a faculty meeting. And we sent out a link to parents of all grade levels online as well. These are the response rates for each school by students, parents, and teachers. There's one number that we're working on fixing, which is the response rate from the middle school. We'll have an updated number for that soon for the final report. But across the board, you can see that most students in all of the schools completed the student survey, and that's because it was done in the school. And most teachers or school staff completed the teacher survey, and the parent response rate ranged from about 20% to 50% of parents. And that's a pretty typical response rate that I get when I go into districts and send an online survey out to parents. Usually between 20 and 25% of parents will respond to the survey. The main measure that we use to assess social and emotional well-being is called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, or the SDQ. It's a 25-item measure that's been well validated and used in a number of research studies and also frequently in schools and school districts to assess student need. It measures 4 problem areas that I'll be talking about today. The first is emotional problems, and these are feelings of depression or anxiety. So things like I feel very unhappy all the time, I feel nervous a lot of the time, I worry a lot would be examples of emotional problems questions. Second, it measures conduct problems, which are acting out problems, like I get into a lot of fights, I get into trouble a lot. Those are conduct problems. Third, it measures hyperactivity problems, including both inattentive behaviors and hyperactivity behaviors that align with ADHD. So questions like I have trouble concentrating or focusing, I feel like I'm always restless or on the go would be hyperactivity problems. And finally, it assesses peer problems, which are problems with feeling socially isolated or having trouble with friends. So those are the 4 problem types. And in this graph, what we've done is we've shown you the percent of students who fell into the average, slightly raised, high, or very high categories on the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire in each of those 4 problem areas, and also as a total score, which is a composition of the 4 problem scales. The green are students in the average range, and the red are students with the highest need, so it aligns with that, that tiered chart that I showed you earlier. And what you'll notice is about, if you look at that total problem score, about 80% of your students are in the average range, about 15% have slightly raised or high scores, and about 5% have very high scores, which is about what we would expect to see in a general population of children and adolescents, that about 80% are fine in the average range, and then about 20% have more need for supports and services, with that about 8% needing the most significant supports and services. You'll also notice that the problems that your students reported the most were emotional problems. So problems with things like anxiety and depression were the most common problems that were reported by your students, followed by hyperactivity problems and peer problems. Conduct problems were reported much less frequently by students in your district. On the next few charts, I break down the chart by each problem type. So this chart only shows emotional problems, so only those problems with anxiety and depression. And here each column represents one of your schools in the district, with the far right line being the normative data. So when the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire was developed, they collected data from the developers collected data from a very large normative sample, and that sample data is on the far right, and it ranges from students ages 11 to 17. And so what you'll see here is that, as we would expect, the rates of emotional problems increase as students enter middle school and then more substantially into high school. Your elementary and middle school students are right around the norm. The high school students are higher than the norm, but we would also expect that because the normative data collapses across students 11 through 17. The next problems are conduct problems, and here across the board, students in your district are reporting much lower conduct problems than you would expect in a general sample or than the normative sample. A little bit higher in high school, but across the board, very low scores on questions about conduct problems. Hyperactivity problems are those problems with inattention and restlessness. And here, your schools are right around the norm as well, with slightly higher rates in high school, which we would also expect, and some variation across different elementary schools in the district. So some more at South, fewer at Plymouth River, so some variation. Here are peer problems. These are slightly higher in some of your schools than in the normative sample. And again, there's some variation across schools, where in some schools students are more likely to report having trouble with peers, and in other schools students perceive peer problems to be less of an issue for them. This shows the total problem. So again, this is a sum of all 4 of those problem types for all students. And your district is right around the norm or doing better than the norm. And I think that this is an important takeaway message when I look at these data, is that in general, your students are right about where we would expect to see a general population of students, where you have some students who have some significant needs, a number of students who have some moderate needs, and most of your students are doing quite well. So I think that one takeaway message from this would be that you're right around what we would expect in a general population, and in some cases, in many cases, doing even better than what you would expect to see. We're very interested in looking at how problems are associated with school functioning. So we asked students across all the schools to rate how they were doing in a number of different areas in their school life. And for each area in their school life, we said, how are you doing in math? How are you doing in reading? How are you doing in writing? And they could rate themselves as poor, fair, good, very good, or excellent. I think some options like that. What we have here is the percent of students who said that they were doing fair or poor in each of the domains. So if you look first at the column that says average SDQ score, and if you look at math, for example, you can see that 14% of your students said that they were doing poor or fair in math. This isn't to say that they're actually doing poor or fair in math, because we don't have test data to compare this to or teachers' data to compare this to. This is their perceptions of how they're doing in math. And that's significantly lower than the percentage of students with high or very high SDQ scores when we ask them how they feel about how they're doing in math. And if you look down the two columns, what you'll see is a pattern where your general population of students with average SDQ scores, very few of them tend to feel like they're doing fair or poor in each of these problem areas, and a significantly higher, and these are all statistically significant, percent of students with high or very high SDQ scores are saying that they're having trouble in each of these domains of their school life. So a second takeaway message here is that the same students who are struggling and feeling like they're not doing well academically and not feeling good about how they're doing day to day in school are the students who are saying that they're having problems in these social and emotional domains. And that's not saying that one causes the other, because we just have this measure at one point in time, but they are associated with each other. We looked at this specifically among high school students, and we gave high school students a number of additional risk questions that students in the lower grades didn't get. These are from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which your district's been doing for a number of years. And here again, we compared students with average SDQ scores to those with high or very high SDQ scores. And the same pattern shows up here, where students with average SDQ scores are much less likely to use most of the substances that were measured, or to say they've been bullied or been in a physical fight, as compared to students with high or very high SDQ scores who reported that these experiences were much more common for them. This is another slide showing questions from the Youth Risk Behavior Scale and comparing students with average SDQ scores and high or very high SDQ scores. And as we would expect, students with high or very high SDQ scores were significantly more likely to say that they engage in self-injurious behaviors, that they consider and attempted suicide, that they experience dating violence, and that they've been pressured or forced to have sex. So these are statistically significant differences where you're seeing students who are experiencing emotional and behavioral challenges are also saying that they are engaged in or experiencing these other risk and victimization behaviors. Here we asked students, did you want to talk to a mental health provider in the past year? We didn't say mental health provider, we said counselor or therapist or school social worker, and listed a bunch of people. And this chart shows on the far right all of your students. So among all of your students, 28% said they wanted to talk to someone. But those numbers get much higher when we look among students who had high scores on emotional problems, conduct problems, hyperactivity, and peer problems. So we can think about this as a population of students who are experiencing social, emotional, and behavioral problems and really want more help and want to have someone who they can talk to about it. This is the same orange line, but the red line adds the percent who actually talk to someone. So you can see a gap here that looks smaller than the gap we see nationwide, but it still is a gap between students who want to be talking to someone and the percent of students who actually have someone who they talked to in the past year. Here we ask them, are you currently meeting with a counselor, school psychologist, social worker, therapist at school or outside of school? And on the far right is all of the students in your district. So not a high percentage of all of your students in the district are meeting with someone. The good news is that students with social, emotional, behavioral problems are much more likely to be meeting with someone to get support. But even then, the rates are much lower than we'd want them to be. We'd want more students to be connected to those kinds of supports. And you can see that a lot of students in your district say that they're seeing providers outside of school rather than within the school, which is fine. And part of the role of schools can be to connect people to outside providers, but it's an interesting trend to look at. And when we look at the data by school, you can see that that varies across the different schools in the district. This is a slide that just shows service use among high school students. And we were looking at students who seriously considered or attempted suicide as one of the highest risk groups to look at. So among those who seriously considered suicide in the past year, 52% said that they talked to a mental health provider in the past year, and 39% said that they're currently receiving mental health services. Among those attempting suicide in the past year, 49% talked to a mental health provider, and 35% are currently receiving some mental health services. So again, probably one of the highest or among the highest need populations. And even though rates are higher here than among your general student population, you still have half of these students who are not meeting with or talking to a mental health provider. This is the same slide I just showed by school. So here you can see that there's that variation in whether or not students are meeting with providers in school or outside of school, and some differences across the schools in the district. So if you're thinking about how to allocate resources and where to do more outreach, this slide can give some information about where that might be most needed. I'm going to shift into talking about parent data. As a reminder, the parent data is from all grade levels, not just 4 and up. So this is pre-K and up. And as another reminder, only about 28% of parents in the district completed the survey. So these data may not be representative of all of the parents in the district, and probably are not. But what you'll see here is that parents across all grade levels had a similar pattern of indicating the most concern about emotional problems and peer problems among their students. And also similar to students, reported that most of their children were doing fine, and that there's a smaller percent who have some significant need. We asked specifically, does your child have any of the following? And we gave them a list of about 20 different problems, and these were the top 3 problems: anxiety disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and depression. And as you can see here too, there's some variation across schools. As we would expect, anxiety disorders are increasing in middle school, especially here, but also in high school. ADHD stays about the same across the school levels, and depression increases from elementary school into middle and high school. We asked, among those with high SDQ scores, are students receiving mental health services? And across the whole district, most parents said that their children were receiving mental health services. These are parents who had identified their children as having some social, emotional, behavioral need, but parents were less likely to say their children were receiving services at 2 of the schools compared to the other 4 in the district. We asked parents, how satisfied are you, in a number of different categories. We asked them, how satisfied are you with school-wide social emotional programs, mental health supports for your child, communication about social and emotional initiatives, communication about your child as it relates to their social and emotional well-being, and bullying prevention initiatives. And this is the percent of parents across the district who said that they were either satisfied or very satisfied with each of these experiences with the school district, and they were most satisfied with the school-wide social emotional programs and bullying prevention initiatives, and least satisfied with communication about their own child. And in the school by school reports, you'll see that's broken down for each school, and that there is some variation across different schools and where parents were most satisfied. And finally, we asked parents to comment on the teacher-student relationships and relationships with counselors. And we asked parents if they agreed or strongly agreed with each of these statements. Counselors listen when students have problems. Counselors care about students. Teachers like their students. Adults who work in the school care about students. Teachers listen to students when they have problems. And teachers care about their students. And across the board, and this comes across in the school-specific results too, these ratings are very, very high. So parents are perceiving that there's a lot of care and a lot of work that's going into listening to their students and taking care of their students when they have problems. So I have one more slide. So we asked teachers across all grades to be. Okay, yeah, this is the last slide. Teachers across all grades to rank their top concerns for students, and these results are consistent with what parents and students said. Where district-wide, teachers said that anxiety was their top concern in all of the schools. So in every single school, teachers said that anxiety was what they were most concerned about. ADHD was also ranked as a top concern in all of the schools with the exception of the high school. Anger outbursts were rated as a top 3 concern in East and Plymouth River School. And depression ranked as the second top concern in the high school. So here too, there was some variation across schools with this message that anxiety is what teachers are most concerned about. So I'll stop there and open it up to you.
So we did receive the individual reports for each school as well. Does anyone want to?
Outside of the questions that you receive based on the answers you receive for the questions you provide them, did you have a space for extra comments that anybody volunteer?
There was space for people to write extra comments at the end of the reports as well.
Anything of concern?
I passed those along to the school leaders, and my group has done some work to try to summarize those up. It does also vary by schools across the district.
Have you had time to delve into it, or?
We're leaving the open-ended comments for the school-based implementation teams to sort of make sense of and work with as they build their implementation plans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Green, when you focused on the 5 questions, emotional problems, conduct problems, etc., you quantified the 6 schools, and you put the 6, I think, as a total against a baseline or a norm, correct?
I have the 6 schools in those separate slides that talk about emotional problems. So the second set, not the first slide I had up, but the second group of slides do put them up against a norm.
Do you, for instance, my question is, do you have the 4 elementary schools together against a baseline or a norm?
Yes, that would be starting in slide 12.
Which I'm trying to get to, sorry. Bear with me.
If you could go to slide 12. On the far, so this graph shows each of the schools, so the 4 elementary schools, the middle, and the high school, and on the far right side is the norm.
Exactly, but it's that, correct me if I'm mistaken, but isn't you're using, you don't really have, is the norm the sum of the 6 schools?
No, the norm is data that was collected from a very large sample of students not in Hingham.
Right.
By the developers of the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire.
But your norm includes elementary, middle, and high
That's
school
right.
students.
Yes, which is how it's reported in the material from the developers. So it's a limitation of this measure is that it's not broken down by age band in a way that more effectively allows us to directly compare elementary,
exactly.
middle, and high.
With the elementary age kids, the middle school age kids,
Yep.
and then the high school
That's
age
right.
kids. That's my question.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you're right. That's a limitation of this measure. Yeah.
Anyone else? Comments? Questions?
It's a lot to digest. There's a lot here. Thank you, everybody who did all this work to do it. I think the one thing that I took away that I guess concerned me, or even particularly as a parent, was sort of the disconnect between kids who want to talk to a mental health provider and kids who are talking to one.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense from from your research that that's because children aren't telling parents that they need these services, so parents don't understand that, or do you think it's just a general mental health services are hard to come by, insurance doesn't cover them, it's hard to find providers?
Yeah.
That's way too big of a question.
No, I think that there are a lot of reasons, and we did not ask students specifically why they didn't talk to someone if they wanted to. We did ask parents in the parent survey why they didn't connect with someone if they thought it would be helpful to them. And some of the things that came up were challenges with getting connected to someone in the school related to scheduling and availability or not knowing where to go. So that's something that I hear a lot in districts that I go to, is that if there are limited mental health providers, and again, if they're providing services to the students who are most in crisis, then for students who are not in crisis, there may be limited kind of time and availability to supporting students across the broader continuum. And I do have a chart, and it's in the reports, that shows that as student problems increase, so as they move from that green to the yellow to the orange to the red, their likelihood of meeting with a mental health provider goes up substantially. So that it still doesn't reach 50%, so it still is lower than we'd want it to be, but it does go up. So it seems like there is some responsiveness to students with the more significant needs that we'd want to see. But when I talk to students in other districts about this, some of the things they say is that I'm too embarrassed to go. I don't want my friends to know that I'm going. I don't know who the counselors are, and that's usually when counselors are overbooked or too busy. So I think that there are a number of reasons that students, even if they feel like they want to see someone, may not know who to go to or how to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. I had asked questions at another time. Now Heather is coming up. So we got all of this data.
Yes.
And now what do we do
what
with it?
What are we going to do about this?
So
thank you, Dr. Green, for your presentation. That was excellent, and all of your work.
I'll just ask anyone on the task force, is there anything from the task force that you would want the school committee to think about or know from all the data that you've digested? Okay. So, and then there will be meetings at every single school.
Yes.
To share the school data with, and Dr. Green is going to all of those? Or most of them?
Most of either I or one of my doctoral students will be
It's
there.
very generous of you.
And separate
your
meetings
time.
for the staff and the parents.
Right. So there will be a faculty meeting for each faculty with the results specific to that school, and a PTO meeting for parents for results specific to each school as well. So yes, you will become an honorary member of our school community.
A t-shirt or
right. A lanyard and a
got a lot of swag.
Right.
So there, just for the public, there's a lot of in-depth data that is being shared with each of the school communities so that they can understand their baseline.
And we will be posting the reports to our website. So if families would like to read the results, they're welcome to do that.
Oh, excellent.
Right. And tonight was just meant to be kind of a broad overview of the district.
Yeah. So enjoy your time to find time to read that.
Exactly.
Read
Lots of data to delve
okay.
into.
So Heather.
So next steps.
Yes.
So as we know, our objectives in undertaking this whole effort were just to kind of get baseline data of what is going on in our district so that we could determine what areas we should focus on. So instead of, creating some programming on the things that we think or we feel on a daily basis in our work are the most important areas, we wanted to have actual hard data, so we made sure that we focused on the areas that are really and truly where we need. So another objective was just to support the development, review, and selection of the referral processes and procedures. So we want to make sure that as we are doing preventative program for everyone in K through 12, pre-K through 12, we also have, for those students who need a little bit more support, we're being very thoughtful about what programs we're choosing for that as well, and then making recommendations for improvement of, the Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports that we have after we do some piloting of them. So we want to try some things out and then see how effective they are, and obviously focus our efforts on the things that are most effective and impactful. So we have done steps 1 and steps 2. We have just gotten some survey results here. The surveys were completed. The results have been published. As we just said, we're sharing them with faculty and with parents. And steps 3 and steps 4 are where we are right now. So each school has created a building-based intervention team to help with the implementation. So that will be a wide variety of staff there. So teachers, counseling and special education staff, administrators will all be represented on this team so that each building can look at their unique needs and look at what their interventions will be. And we will, as a task force, look at the Tier 1 and Tier 2 materials, so some preventative programming as well as some specific interventions and some screening tools that we will pilot at each level. So for the elementary folks, it's good to know that we will be doing some slightly different, using some slightly different tools at the elementary levels, not to kind of spread out and see how many different things we can do, but see what's most effective. So there will be intentionally some variation in what we do at each elementary school so that we can then tailor it best to our population and make sure that we're picking something that was the most effective so that we're not just trying one thing, seeing how it works and evaluating that, but we're trying a few things and evaluating and picking the best. And then same thing will be happening at the middle and high school levels. So students have been identified through the survey data. So again, we're looking at identifying screening tools. So we might be doing some more individual student screening to see which students we need to do some of the more intensive interventions with. Looking at identifying and piloting any short-term intervention groups that we may need to run and see how effective those are, and pilot those interventions with students and obviously be reflective of what our efforts have been. Like I said, elementary schools will pilot a little range of options so that we make sure to make a recommendation to the task force and we use the most effective tools. Same thing at the middle and high school levels. So this will be this is the typical response to intervention triangle where we say where we see what percentage of students fall in which categories. So you'll see that HTSS, we're embarking on the social emotional efforts right now. I know academic is to come in the future. So the right side of the triangle is where we are focusing right now. So that just kind of defines what each of the tiers are a little bit more. So this spring, the task force will form subcommittees to implement the tiered system of support. Teachers, administrators, counseling, and support staff will review curriculum and other intervention materials. And then our parent task force, which is a really great part of this effort. We have the Parent Ambassador program that Brenna is heading up. And so the parent task force will work together with a lot of the parent volunteers to kind of see how do we develop and sustain community engagement, community feedback, because as we saw, we got, between a quarter and a third of parents who responded to the survey, so we want to engage as many parents as humanly possible to work with us in these efforts on this tiered system of support, because it is for all of our students, and we want to hit as many students and parents and families as we can and engage them robustly so that we can get a lot of feedback and make sure that we're doing the best to serve the needs of all of our kids. And so you will see, similar to Dr. Green's slide, 80% of the kids have the primary interventions, 15% will have the secondary or tier 2 interventions such as specialized groups or kids with a little more high-risk behavior, and then the third tier is for really kids that are either in crisis or have a very high level of need. So we'll work with school staff and also partner with community partners as well to get those kids interventions and supports that they need. So that's just a nice little snapshot of our time frame. We did the surveying and the results and data analysis, or data and report analysis is all done. Results and pilot screenings will be happening in the next couple of months, and then we will be reflective of our process and try and roll out full implementation in the fall. Didn't know that was going to be that difficult to say. So that is where we are.
Questions for Heather?
How are you, or maybe this is still in plan, but how are you going to measure whether tools are effective or not?
So it will be it kind of depends on what is being implemented and what tool is. So if they're screening tools, we're going to make sure that we're catching the amount of kids that we think is appropriate with the data that we have. And also there will be some interventions that we'll have either like pre and post testing, or you kind of see what is the goal or the skill that the group is supposed to target, and then there will be some follow-up in terms of how effective we think that will be. So if it's either a post test, or did the kids gain the skills that they needed, can they be reflective about what their coping skills are, things like that. It kind of depends on if it's a screening or if it's an intervention, so it might be a little bit individual to what we're doing.
I guess I kind of stump, and maybe I will understand it better after everything's implemented, or there's plans actually in place. But you know, when I see that the kids in high school have, you know, huge emotional issues, I mean, might be stemming from school, from friends, relationships, the work that they're doing, but it also could stem from home and, you know, what's going on in their family life and personal life. So I guess I struggle is where you know, how much can a school actually do?
Yep.
And how much is really then up to the parents. Maybe that's where the parent education comes into place and things like that. But how are you going to even identify where these where is the anxiety coming from? Because we're trying to solve, I guess, an issue without really having a good understanding of what the cause is.
So just to clarify, we're actually not trying to fix anyone.
Right.
What we're trying to do is increase and give kids the skills, knowledge, and tools necessary so that when things get tough, they can manage it effectively and not have that substantially sort of impact their ability to function. So, so I think it's connected to your first question, which the task force ourselves have been working through, right? So if we do, if we're trying to reduce symptomology, right, there's nothing we're going to be able to do in 6 to 8 weeks that will increase or decrease the presence of symptomology consistent with emotional behavioral disorder. What we're really focused on is increasing sort of student functioning, right? Giving them the skills and strategies and tools, not to make them not depressed, but to give them strategies, networks, resources, and strategies of how to deal with it when it gets tough, right? Because the issue isn't trying to fix anyone or make anybody not anxious or not depressed or not have challenge, but to give them the necessary skills and knowledge that when those things happen, it doesn't cause a decrease in functioning. So we're going back to try to figure out when we go to, for example, when we ask a student prior to starting an intervention, how are you feeling, right? Like, or what's your symptomology look like? And we sort of do a pre-test, we do an 8 to 10 week intervention, go back and do a post-test, and what you probably will see is no significant difference, right? Because if we're measuring sort of you know, the defining characteristics of depression or anxiety, that's still going to be present, but we're focused more on how are you able to function in the environment, right? And if we can see an increase in functioning, that's really what we're aiming at, not a decrease in symptomology. Because you're right, we cannot be the sole mental health provider in a student's family. So when you think about that triangle, we're focusing on tier 1, so what is the preventative, proactive education that all kids will get? Tier 2, what are those specialized groups that we will run? And then on tier 3, that's where we're really working with our adjustment counseling team to make sure that we have appropriate referral agencies in place, make sure that we have appropriate community connections built in. And that's where you see educating parents on how to access these resources, how to actually make referrals, how to get the help and support they need, because we can only go so far. So I think you're right on, Kay, in terms of we can't do all of that. And that's why by building the model, the goal is to have sort of a rapid connection of the kid to the resource they need, whether that's sort of proactive primary intervention, whether that's a small group targeted skill building opportunity, or whether that's access to more you know, significant mental health care. Does that make sense? But that is that is the triangle, right? And that's what so right now we're really good at. I think that's what some of Dr. Green's data was pointing to. We're really good with the kids at crisis, right? And so there's an increase in opportunity to actually connect with services, sort of the more at-risk kids are. But what we're trying to do is actually not be so reactive and try to build a proactive model. If we can give the kids the skills and strategies sooner, could they put them into action, right before they hit a point in their functioning where they just sort of break and stop functioning. And that's sort of what we're experiencing now, which is causing the crisis. So we're attempting to be proactive, but again, we're still in development of what those tools will be. How are we going to structure this? Well, how are we going to, and that's why you'll see through the winter and spring, different schools piloting and trying different strategies and techniques and structures to see what works best, right? And then so they can bring that information back to the task force. So as we roll out for full implementation in the fall, we're using a universal district-wide model that we can then educate everybody about here's how you access those supports and services. Because you're right, that we can't, we're not all licensed clinical psychologists who will be sitting in rooms with kids all day. That's not our role or our function. Our function is education and making sure all kids get, right, everybody has ups and downs, right? Like the proportion of kids who in the United States who experience any kind of mental health challenge is significant. And so the goal is to make sure they have the right skills and knowledge necessary so when that happens, they don't break. Right, they can actually build some resilience and sort of know what to do when life gets tough, which is our goal in trying to build the whole model.
Right.
If that helps clarify.
Even if you are a mental health clinician, that you're not going to make the depression go away forever. You're going to increase the coping skills and their ability to access and function on a daily basis. So, exactly.
And to your point, a lot of times the treatment would be family or much more involved than people are contracting with a school to do. They're not sending their kids to school to know all of their family's ins and outs.
Yeah.
So then it's really referral out for them to get the support they need.
I was actually impressed at how many kids their first go-to was parents.
Yep.
And that was very clear out of the, which was nice to see.
Absolutely.
I heard a great way of it being likened today, because I was actually at a seminar from 9 to 5 today, and a huge portion of it was a woman speaking to us about the development of the adolescent brain, which was fascinating to hear that it actually isn't complete till 25. Shucks, my kids aren't there yet. But in any event, the analogy that she used was a road, and that they're all on a road, and the road's going to have bumps, and when they become overwhelmed, that's when they crash and burn, and what we're just trying to do is provide the guardrails. So we know they're going to veer off the road. It's going to happen, but there are going to be guardrails there to keep them from crashing.
Right, and how quickly can they recover?
Perception.
Right.
I mean, just the way she had us visualize it was a really good analogy.
Yeah, that's great.
All we can do is put the guardrails up. We
Right.
can't stop them from rushing down the road.
Exactly. And we just try and minimize the damage.
Yeah.
As you're thinking about creating a relationship and identifying partners that you can refer, our students for service, perhaps you want to think about working with the medical, education facilities. They can perhaps send in, interns. That would be a resource that may come free of charge, just for the initial screening and things like that. Because as we go out here and start speaking with the students and parents and so on and so forth, more students may want to come forward and speak with someone. So if you can make more resources available, I know that
we're trying our best, Carlos. That's
that would be great.
That was
Thank
the
you.
first part of our meeting.
Thank
you about the needs, but it's important work, and our kids need it.
Right.
So I have one more question. So we did this initial survey. Are we planning to survey students and teachers on a regular cycle to maintain our information, to know what's happening in the community?
Right, and that's something that would only be the wise thing to do, to see now that we've implemented all these programs based on what our needs, to kind of see how are we doing with that. And that's not just because we did a survey and we found out what our needs are with this snapshot now. As we know, the needs of our population changes, so we need to kind of continually reassess what are our needs and what are we going to do about it, because if we solve these problems right here and now, that doesn't mean that new problems aren't going to crop up in 5 years, and we could be looking at a completely different slice of the population or societal issues or whatever is going on. So yeah, we need to
I
follow
think it's
this.
also a way to effectively communicate to our community as well that the work we're doing is having an impact, similar to how we can do for academic performance, right? So we have, low math scores, we go in and we run intervention and support and give kids extra counseling, and then we go back a year, so look at our math score now, right? And this is an area of functioning that we know is so closely connected to academic performance that we don't have that data, right, that we do for academics. So this is our first shot, and I can imagine on a 2 to 3, maybe 4-year cycle, sort of going back in, similar to the pattern that we see play out with the department in the program reviews. I might see social emotional becoming its own program or department for review that's on a semi-annual basis to sort of report back and say, now here's where we're at. And we hope to see an increase in kids receiving connection in mental health services. We'd expect to see an increase in overall student functioning and a decrease in the reports of, but then again, we go back to what are we using to measure it. We want to make sure we're using the right tool to actually show. There's always going to be some proportion of the population with a particular challenge. What we're really focused on is increasing student functioning so that when it does get tough, we have the guardrails in place.
Yeah, and she was also speaking to the fact that everybody has stress, and sometimes the only way to move forward is stress.
That's
it's
right.
stressful
It's a very
to grow
adaptive emotion.
yourself, to grow your mind. Your
Stress can be good sometimes.
Similar to anxiety,
and
right,
that you
Jen?
almost need stress to get you as a human being to move forward.
Absolutely.
It's just controlling the amount of stress and
That's
making
right.
it manageable.
That's right.
Right.
So, Dr. Green, is there a recommended cycle of doing these surveys, or is that? I mean, I think annually is too much, but
different districts are doing different things depending on their capacity. One of the things I like about the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire is that it's free, it's publicly available, it's something that could be easily administered and scored. So, I mean, compared to some other measures, it's relatively easy to give and start to collect data on if it is something you want to do more regularly, but it takes a while also to roll out these programs and to start to see some effects in the organization of it. So I don't have a good answer to that question.
Well, it's something I think your task force should think of, on the long term of as we keep going. Yeah, I mean, as much as measuring the effectiveness, but just understanding what our population's needs are.
Right, exactly. That's the only way to
we
be
ensure
effective.
responsive programming.
Yeah.
Right. That's the key.
Okay. Great. Well,
you.
we thank you,
Thank
and
you, Dr.
we
Green.
look forward to
Fantastic job. Thank you,
continuing the
whole
conversation.
task force,
And
great
thank
job,
you.
everybody.
Okay, now, we're gonna, guess people have to get up early in the morning. Okay, as we all do. 6.3, we're gonna try and, to act on the proposed resubmission of the statement of interest to the MSBA for a foster school project. So earlier, the school committee did take a general vote to move ahead again with the SOI, but we have to take a formal, specific vote, as is in our packet, in order to submit this with the the resubmission of the SOI. So, Dr. Ed, since you're long-range planning, would you like to make the motion?
I would make a motion to deal with the following proposal.
Just read it.
Want me to read it?
Yep.
Better.
Is that
Resolved.
right, John? Just read it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Having convened an open meeting on February 12th, 2018, prior to the closing date, the Hingham School Committee of Hingham, Massachusetts, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the statement of interest form dated on or before April 6, 2018, for the Foster Elementary School located at 55 Donner Avenue, Hingham, identified on map ID 30/0/01, close brackets, which describes and explains the following deficiencies and the priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future for replacement of or addition to obsolete buildings in order to provide for a full range of programs consistent with state and approved local requirements. The building was built in 1951 and does not meet current code and significantly lacks environmental quality for natural lighting, artificial lighting, fresh air ventilation, and evenly distributed heat and cooling temperatures to enhance the educational environment. Classroom configuration does not allow for uninterrupted instruction. Several classrooms have no natural light. The building envelope and windows systems, plural, are inefficient, and the steam heating distribution system and electrical systems are failing due to deterioration. And thereby further specifically acknowledges that by submitting this statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of an application, the awarding of a grant, or any other funding commitment from the Hingham School Building Authority, or commits the town of Hingham to filing an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Just want to remind the voters at home, population, that this was voted at the home meeting last year for authorizing us to apply for the MSBA, and with the understanding that if we applied and were accepted, that we would start with a feasibility study, and as a matter of fact, $750,000 was also approved, subject to being accepted into the MSBA. So we did not, obviously, got accepted in the first round, and we are hoping that this time around we will be accepted. But nothing will go forward if we don't get, one, the approval. Second, we have to go back to, town meeting perhaps to get the fundings.
Right.
So that this is just a step to continue the process, and for that I just wanted to clarify.
Yep, thank you. Okay.
Could I,
yeah.
you had said that we don't have to go back to town meeting to get the funds have already been allocated in the form of a
feasibility,
warrant.
yes, right?
For the feasibility, yes.
Yes,
yes.
but
If we get accepted.
Yeah, he means to build the school.
Oh, yes, okay.
If
yes.
we don't get accepted and we
Then-
choose to go on our own, we would go back to town meeting first for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you for
Yes,
the clarification.
yes. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great.
Thank you.
Unanimous.
So we'll have to have you sign the minutes with that formal vote for
Okay.
the submission of the SOI.
All right. And then the Board of Selectmen will be taking it up at another meeting, and I believe the School Building Committee will be doing some more presentation about the project at that time. Next, 6.4, to review the Memorandum of Understanding between the Hingham School Department and the Hingham High School Rowing Association and act as appropriate. And Aileen has been the school committee member, key liaison on this, and she's gonna take us through this.
So you've already seen this. We went through it several meetings ago, but because of all the budget meetings and issues, we have bumped it out till now because there wasn't a real time-sensitive issue. We do want to get this voted before the spring season starts, and it's been over a year since we started this process. So there were several grammatical changes that were made, and we did clarify the SSS SNAP program because we only had it in there as SNAP, and so we made that correction. All of the corrections have been shared with HHRSA, and they're fine with all of the changes that we made because none of them were substantive, to be honest with you. So tonight I would be making a motion that we vote to accept this MOU so that we can finally get it signed and move forward.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion,
I would
questions?
just ask, same question I asked the last time this came up, and it's the very, very first paragraph. And my question is, when you read through this, these 8 pages or 7 pages, There is fundraising and aspect as part of this MOI. And my question is, have we had a legal opinion?
Town council reviewed this and made extensive changes. So this was all signed off on by town council.
Terrific. Answers my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you, Eileen, and the members of the committee that worked on this. I know you put a lot of efforts to it. And it's time consuming, so thank you.
I'm glad that we are finally have a final product.
The date, November 20th?
Oh.
What's?
That was probably the date of the draft. I
Okay,
think
so-
that's just in the typing. Yeah.
Okay.
We can take that
All
out
right,
when we
other
sign
than
it.
that.
Yeah.
Great.
That was probably the last time I
yeah.
typed something on it.
Yeah. Okay, so all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Great. So, now, 6.5, to hear the details of the search process for the next Director of Student Services.
Mhm. Yes. So the process began about 2 weeks ago when we posted this opening on School Spring. In addition to that, we share information about the opening with our local peers, in terms of superintendents, and where else did we send it, Jamie? To
About all the prep programs across the state.
yes, the teacher preparation, educator preparation programs across the state. And so we're in the process of receiving applications now. We have a process that's very similar to what we have for other central office and particularly principal openings, the same categories of activities. And one of those, of course, is getting feedback from constituents, and so there are 3 scheduled. One of them actually happened this afternoon. Opportunities for parents and for members of the staff to contribute to the profile. There is a job description that goes with this job. It's pretty much we edited it a bit from the last time, but the job description is the job description. There's certainly certain tasks that we would expect, and anybody would expect a school student services person to do. That's the job description, but we also are trying to create a profile of the person and the implementer of the task force, what characteristics that person should have. So one forum happened today, and that was a forum for parents. And this afternoon, Jamie went off to eSchool, and there are had a forum for teachers, and there will be 2 more of those kinds of forums, and another forum for parents on Thursday.
Thursday night?
Thursday night.
Yeah.
Right. That's
Tomorrow afternoon is middle
not
school,
here.
and next week after the break is the last forum at the high school.
Right. So that's one aspect. You have also in your packet, I think the timeline is there. I think as well there is the actual posting. We have to do an internal posting, of course, but the same information in terms of the characteristics that we need or the qualifications went to the School Spring posting as well. And you can see characteristics: well qualified, highly motivated, experienced in special ed administration, instruction, and leadership, must be certified or certifiable. So there are certain characteristics that we don't have a choice about, and certification is one of those. And in particular, the certification we're looking for would be as a special ed administrator. Many of these candidates might have multiple other kinds of certifications that are related or not to this role, but the particular one that's kind of a deal breaker would be certification as a special education administrator. And so there's information about how to apply. They're actually sending in information that is a letter of intent, current resume, and 3 letters of reference, and those come here. We received them in this office. So in addition to that, you have the timeline that we anticipate. Again, kind of a typical timeline because the same kinds of activities. So we're in the process now of forming the screening committee. And as we usually do with jobs like this, we would want to have 2 school committee members be participants. And so I would suggest that anyone interested in this would let Liza know, and she would make the determinations about how this would work. We would have a credentials review prior to the screening committee looking at resumes, and the credentials review really is to be sure those key elements of the job description and the characteristics on the posting are there. So, for example, today we got an application looked very good, very well qualified person in terms of the resume and so on, but did not have the prerequisite licensure. Now, that doesn't mean that the person isn't working on it. It doesn't mean that we would just out of hand fail to consider that application, but raises a big question about what is there. After the credentials review, which is done as a rating sheet, and that is done by the principals and directors, and they then forward that rating sheet goes with the resumes and cover letters and packets for each candidate to the screening committee. So you can see the initial screening interviews would be during that 2nd and 3rd week in March. We would expect that committee would forward to us some semi-finalists, and depending upon how many applications overall, I would say 3 to 5. Obviously, we don't have a large number. It might be smaller. 3 to 5 people would be recommended to meet with those of us at central office, and from that, we would come up with finalists. It could be all the people that were forwarded from the screening committee. It could be a smaller number than that. Subsequent to that, we have a practice of doing what we call internal site visits and external site visits. So we would have each of the finalist candidates come to Hingham and spend the better part of a day and go to each of the buildings to know what's happening there. At the end of the visiting and meeting principals and other folks in the districts, some sort of a public event, as we had last year at the high school with the 2 openings we had that. It could be an evening thing, it could be late afternoon, but it would be an opportunity for the public to come meet the candidate and hear some words from the candidate and ask some questions. And then we would have an opportunity, assuming that the finalist candidates live in this state. I don't think we have plans in our budget to go out of state. But anyway, there are other ways that you can meet with people. There are conference calls and that kind of thing, or other ways that we can connect with folks. But we would go to visit where they now work, and we would be looking to talk to people who are the candidate supervisors and those that the candidate is supervised by, likely also a group of parents, and some members of the staff that would particularly relate to the candidate, and we get a lot of information from that stuff, and ultimately we would hope to have a recommendation for the school committee at the meeting of the 21st. This is a little bit differently worded. If you look actually at the Ed Reform law, this candidate will be the school committee's appointment based upon a recommendation from the superintendent, and I think of that as a we, those of us here. That's a little different from when we're appointing a principal, where then that is my recommendation, my appointment. I would make you aware of that. I would certainly want you to let me know if you had reservations, that kind of thing, but this is, just as the superintendent appointment is the decision of the school committee, this would be the same way.
Is that just the Director of Student Services?
I'm sorry?
Is that just for this position? That it's an appointment by the school committee?
Yes.
Okay. Should we not have that somewhere as part of our responsibilities?
Well, it's a little bit different. I think you're perhaps thinking of it in a different way. In the case of the superintendent, you actually conduct the search. You decide whether or not you're going to have an agency, assist you with that. You decide what the terms of the search are going to be, and you decide among the candidates. And you might have a committee that helps you, but ultimately you choose among the candidates. The way this works is we make the recommendation as to the person we think is the most highly qualified. And you can say yay, but you can also say nay. But if you say nay, that doesn't mean that you have the opportunity to choose from the remaining people. It would then be another recommendation. So it's different in that sense of you running the search, choosing from among what seems to be the best candidates in the case of the superintendent. Here, we would be doing that part, recommending someone to you, and you have the right to say, it's not going to work for here.
But I think the assistant superintendent and the business director are the same.
Similar.
Yeah.
It's the same as this.
But not the other directors?
Right.
No, the other directors are supervised by me.
Just want to make sure it's
Yeah.
clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, all right, so, do something else to add?
Yeah, I think I said that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just checking.
So, yeah, I was just gonna say. So if you guys can let me know, if you're interested in serving, you have the timeline, and we'll make that determination at the 26th meeting.
And we don't know how many candidates. I will say that we're certainly aware from the two principal searches that we did last year and the one that we're doing now that, we got total numbers of applicants in the teens. And then we had, it's always a possibility somebody could drop it all along the way for any number of reasons, such as getting another job. Second thing I would note is that there are a fair number of searches for this particular role in the immediate area. Whitman Hanson is searching. Marshfield closed a search, actually identified finalists recently. And so we're not expecting a large pool. We always say we only need one really good candidate, but you kind of shake and get nervous until you're sure that that candidate is there. The closing date is the 28th for receipt of applications, and so right now we have 4.
Well, it's still early.
But we have a
Very,
vacation
very
period
early.
coming
Yeah.
up.
Very
and
early. Let's not-
my guess is that, a
It'll be
number of
fine.
people are going to use that time to submit their packets. So
Okay.
we're not in a state of panic, although we're not going to have
don't need
90
that.
candidates as we did with the athletic director search.
Okay, great. Well, we will wait to hear more as we proceed. Okay, 6.6, to discuss submitting the resolution on retail marijuana to the Planning Board, Board of Selectmen and Advisory Committee as comments on warrant articles and act as appropriate. So the marijuana resolution that we voted on November 20th was to inform the Planning Board of our thoughts on what they were discussing to put forth. Now, for warrant articles and reviewing those. Now that they are officially in the warrant articles, any of those comments are thrown out and they take fresh and new comments. So there are 4 warrant articles that refer to marijuana establishments. The first one, and the planning board may be voting on this on the 15th, which is in 3 days, which is the urgency of getting this done. So, and a vote at town meeting for articles put forth by the planning board, because these are zoning bylaws, is a 2/3 vote for approval. So one article which will be the first one put forth, is a complete ban on marijuana establishments. If that passes, then we don't have to vote on the other articles. If the complete ban doesn't pass, then there's an article regarding zoning for time, place, and manner, such as hours of operation, location in town, distance from schools, and other places that children congregate. Then if the time, place, and manner proposal doesn't pass, then there is another warrant article that refers to changes in certain definitions in the bylaw that would prohibit retail marijuana at the farmer's market and as a home business. So as each one doesn't pass, there's another one to provide smaller and smaller restrictions. So,
And I apologize, because
Yeah.
I'm reading over your shoulder, but
Yes.
again, so everybody listening knows, we're only still discussing for retail recreational marijuana, so it's a
Yes.
complete ban, but only on retail recreational, not medical, just so people know
Right.
that.
Yes.
Because some people would want it to be on everything, but this
Right.
isn't what is
Yeah.
proposed, it's just retail
Yeah.
recreational.
And so that's, I'm reading my notes. So then, also, if the reason for the restriction on the time, place, and manner is that they could set up in any business district, such as the Derby Street, the Shipyard, or in the square, and yeah, so that there's the concern of, being 500 feet from where children congregate, and in the square, St. Paul School is there, and the kids are there. So that's where we are, and I would propose we simply revote what we had.
Which isn't, for some reason, didn't get included. The one that's in here is the old one. The one that's in the packet doesn't have the changes that we did agree on last time. You have it in your hands, but that's not what's in here.
Oh, really?
Because I was thinking, wait a minute, we made changes and they're not here. You have the one
this is
that's the right
oh,
one, but
I
it's
didn't-
not what's in here. Because we
I
changed.
didn't look at this one because I was
Right,
editing
so-
this one.
Because we changed, and I see Eliza has it, we
Well, I
changed, yeah, some things.
suggested
Yeah.
this was today, but.
No, because right here, this says, see, this one says, which was the change I asked
Oh.
for last time, whereas providing access to mind-altering drugs such as marijuana within the Hingham community, yours says may result,
Yeah.
and the one we have in the packet still has the old language will result.
Oh, okay.
So this one is not, this one's not the right one.
Okay, that was an original draft.
Yeah, this is the very first one, I think, that was in front of us.
Well,
So Liza,
I
to your
have 2
point,
copies of this.
to your point that there is 3 potential warrant articles.
Mm-hmm.
Should we sort of like cover the other 2 here as well? Perhaps add that, we,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks.
perhaps add that we recognize that the planning board has a duty and we trust them that they'll make the right decision. So I would sort of like add to, therefore, the first therefore, the word, this Hingham School Committee supports or perhaps encourage a full ban.
That's what we have.
Respecting.
That's what we have in the last,
Yes,
in
in
the
the
last
last
paragraph.
What is
That
that?
we're supporting a full ban. The change we
Yeah.
made was on recreational retail marijuana establishments. That's what we do say.
I mean, we could,
Oh,
I was thinking about this, actually, and,
Thank you.
and, do we,
thank you.
I would like to me personally, I feel like this is full ban, so I would support then all the
Clearly, we would
restrictions.
want Yeah. number
But
two.
the wording of each of these specific warrant articles wasn't posted for me to quickly find this afternoon, and so because I wanted to be able to read it and react specifically, but I couldn't do that. So I kind of feel like I don't mind adding something of any, I don't know how you word it, of referring in any other restrictions required, but I think us just saying that we support the ban, then that would imply we would support the other restrictions.
Yeah, and we state in order to ensure the safety and well-being of our youngest community members. So I think it's clear what our standpoint is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, you know, I mean, the obvious concern, and I think the reason for these second and third tier levels is, to be frank, it requires, a full ban requires a 2/3 vote of the town, and only 58% of the town voted against legalization. So 2/3 of the town didn't already vote against legalization. So if that's what we need for a full ban, the prior vote may be an indicator that that's not going to happen, although you just, you know, you don't know.
You don't know
if
what
a
happens
different
at town
demographic
meeting.
is going to
Yeah.
show up at
Yeah.
town meeting than went to the polls.
Sure.
Plus, then you're not doing it in private, you're doing it in public, and that may change people's
True.
vote. But in any event, I think that, like Liza said, if we're just voting a full ban, by implication, if that doesn't pass, it's clear that,
They have to abide by the law.
right.
And we are just submitting our comments on the warrant article. I mean, you know, we don't have to overthink this.
No, I agree.
But, and the only reason I thought of removing recreational in this instance is because the bylaws are relating to just marijuana establishments and just, but we can leave it in if we want to be specific. I don't, it's not a big deal.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
That we submit another, what do you call it?
Supportive.
Resolution.
Thank you. Resolution to request a ban on all retail recreational marijuana establishments in Hingham.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? So we'll keep in the word recreational. Okay.
Yeah, to be specific.
Are we keeping both words or one?
Excuse me.
We're gonna keep, oh.
We have that one.
No, we have,
Yeah.
we just
Yeah.
want to be clear that we have the right.
That was struck.
Yeah, but we're gonna keep it in.
We're gonna do retail and/or recreational, or retail.
Retail,
slash
recreational, we'll keep it in.
I'm not exactly sure what recreational would be,
Why?
but
Why are we going with just?
Retail?
Couldn't retail be medical as well?
We're not talking about
It's,
that.
oh, Donna, can you help us clarify?
Well,
So the reason the zoning board is using the phrase marijuana establishments
Okay.
is you could be talking about growing, you could be talking about manufacture, you could be talking about a variety of things beyond retail.
Oh, okay. So,
You might want to refer to.
so it should just be marijuana
On
establishments?
Marijuana establishments, yeah.
Okay. So we'll take out the retail and recreational.
And substitute.
And it,
No.
no, that's all we have to take out. We can leave it the way it is otherwise. Thank you, Donna. Okay. Would you like to?
So I'll make a motion
revise your-
to approve the resolution on a request to ban all marijuana establishments in Hingham, with the two edits of eliminating retail and recreational So you'd have to eliminate it also at the top in the title.
Yeah. And I second that with the provision that we're being led to believe that that doesn't include medical marijuana establishments.
Yep.
So as long as that is in fact accurate, then I second the motion.
Okay. Okay. Any other further discussion? No? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right. So we have 6, we have 1 absent. Okay. All right. So that's done. Now, 6.7, to hear a forecast for the second quarter of the fiscal 18 operating budget. So this is to have a budget update of this current year budget of where we are today. So John.
Okay, thank you. In the packet, there's a letter and also a budget summary with some notes on it indicating what the variances that we have for the budget. At this point, this budget numbers are as of January 30th, 2018, so a little bit over half a year. And what I'm projecting at this point is a negative $12,117. Now, keep in mind that in the mid-year, there's still a lot of time to go. What we basically do in order to get this forecast is we look at all the individual line items, and we take our cumulative knowledge of the operations and what's been going on within the system, the known changes that we have that may be significantly over budget, and we sort of make accounting for them. We know certain items would be running under budget, and we'll be making adjustments for those as well. And what we basically do is we look at each account and we say, here's where the balance is right now. What do we think the balance will be come June 30th? Okay, and on a spreadsheet aside, apart from the budget, we'll either put a plus or minus into that column to project what we think the available balance is at the end of the year. And then we'll sum all of those either available or negative balances together, and we'll come up with a number for this projection. In this case, the number is negative $12,117. Still, as I said, very early in the year. $12,000 isn't much of a variance to speak of. It basically is giving me an indicator that this is a very tight budget year. Okay, that the money that we have, and because we're significantly overspent in a couple of areas, the big drivers of this negative increase is energy and special education costs. Just alone in January was a brutal month for energy. For example, the high school bill came in at $61,000 for the month of January. Okay, that was just for the therm, and then National Grid was another 11 on top of that. Okay, that's an awful lot of money. That's up about 70% from what we were the previous January. Now, we all know it was very, very cold, and that's just what happens when you hit this extreme cold. For the protection of the buildings, we had the systems running. We didn't really turn them down to setbacks. We kept them running all night. We kept the perimeter going. But you have 3 weeks of extraordinary cold like that. That's the type of bills you get. I'm sure most likely I would assume that if you've all seen your energy bills too, and I mean I looked at mine I've never seen a bill like that in my life. For my gas bill for this month too. So, you see it come into the numbers. In addition to that, special education costs, contract services are running higher. Special education professional development's running higher. We didn't get a grant that we had gotten in previous years for PD. And then also, we had talked about this. You've seen that in the 19 budget, I've actually increased the transportation expenditures because I've been under budgeting in transportation, for several years, and this year is holding true to that continued under budgeting. I think I had $375,000, but we're running more along the line of that $500,000 figure. So, So, you know, those are some significant negatives to the budget. So there are some offsets that are positive. What this tells me, right now, this budget is manageable. We're in good shape. I don't see that there's a risk of, you know, us getting into the negative, because as you all know, we need to make sure that we don't get into the negative, right? We can only spend the appropriation that we have. Thoughts that I have, we'll take a look at this next month and how the figures are looking. And, you know, this year I may issue a little bit earlier, sort of like an essential spending only guidance to the field, you know, so we'll just cut back a little bit, just to make sure that we have, you know, better visibility as we come into, you know, the close of the year. So in summary, this budget's manageable. $12,000 doesn't faze me at all. I mean, we know that there'll be a lot of changes. We know at the end of the year, I say we know, I'm conservative, so every year that I've ever done this, there's always been PO money that's freed up at the end of the year because they close out without being expended. But because I'm conservative, I'm not a betting man for the most part, so I will maintain my conservatism on that. But I believe that we'll be in great shape, we'll be fine. And later on in the year, when we were meeting with long-range planning, we sort of removed a number of items from the capital. These are smaller items that we didn't want to put into capital. So we have a list of other things that we'd like to do should we have some monies, you know, should we be able to project some positive balance coming into the end of the year. So in a couple of months, once we get a better look at the figure, we can present those types of projects to the committee, so we can plan in advance, you know, how to use any other funds that may develop.
I would say, too, that one other thing that is unusual about this year, and that is that we have one teacher who has been out the entire year and will be out the rest of the year, a surgery situation, and which we didn't think would be this long, but there were complications. So that means that we're paying the teacher's salary, and this is a very senior teacher, so near the top of the scale, but we also have to provide a sub for the entire year. We have another teacher that has been out, will be out since before Christmas through the remainder of the year. So again, the teacher will earn his or her full salary because they have sick days that have been accumulated, but we need to provide a substitute. And those subs we pay at a higher rate per diem than others. And so factors like that, if you're looking at a teacher that's earning $100,000, even if we're paying a much lower rate, that's $200,000 in some instances. So that very rarely happens.
It's true, it is extra. So in the summary sheet that you have, I put notes beside them. You'll see a lot of notes showing that we have the allowance sitting in here is a very large positive balance. So some of the negatives that you see beside the individual categories have to do with the bargaining that we have completed, but didn't really get into the budget book. So, you know, now in the forecast, we sort of put it in there, but so you see a big allowance as being available, and then you see negative within the categories, and that's sort of an offset to that big allowance that you see in there. And then I don't take everyone because I don't know what every $1,000 is, but when they typically get over 10,000 in that range, you know, there's usually a pretty good explanation for, or some activity that's occurred that sort of speaks to it, and I've included notes like that on the summary for your reference. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
You guys have questions? Security, R3600 is
that I don't really put any money in security.
Oh,
so
okay.
that item is
That
actually
seemed-
school messenger. So
that seemed odd.
you know,
Okay.
You know, I mean, you know, as we're tight in the budget, it's sort of sitting in operations.
Okay.
But when we booked it into security. It rightly belongs in security, but
right.
We didn't get a grant this year, even one that was retracted. We didn't get anything this year, and that's been our main source of any spending in that area has been grants.
All right. Okay, now, 6.8, to continue discussion of the fiscal 19 budget priorities and perspectives. We received a new forecast document today, which I forwarded to, or I put it in the folder, which is in your folder.
Liza, we have paper copies. It would be
Oh.
easier for people to see those.
So this is now the, this includes, this is the townwide forecast.
Tony, would you mind getting one?
And
thanks.
So this is now, there's a shortfall of $2,539,731 in the town, for the town forecast. And the changes from the, when we saw this before, so from the January 29th one, this includes the school department budget that and the number that was presented tonight, not the number that we presented on February 6th. And then there were also some revised sewer numbers in the revenue and then there were some town union contracts that were settled that adjusted the Article 6, Article 4 and 5, the 4 and 5 numbers. So, adjusted some of the salaries and wages line items on the town side. So that's where we are of a town budget deficit.
You can see our new number is on page 2, the back of the front, and the total amount there, the 677,795 is that new number that we showed you tonight that reflected the 122,000 drop in the bottom line.
So then on February 26th, we're supposed to get another revised town forecast. Because on February 22nd, the GIC is going to announce the anticipated rates for health insurance. So we'll see in the forecast it has a 10% increase, but it may be more than that, maybe less, we don't know. So that's where we are. It's going to be a tough one, and as Dr. Gallo noted, maybe the most challenging budget scenario since 2008, right?
Yeah, well,
Was
actually,
that 2008, 2009?
the budget for the 9-10 school year, the year that East opened, that's when we had an override, and the amount needed to be lowered. Directions from Town Hall, we did do that, and then we were in a situation where the override, even though it was successful, didn't provide all that we needed to open that school. So that was a very challenging year. We were able to use some strategies like taking advantage of open positions and not filling them, sharing, that kind of thing. And this is very challenging. I would call your attention to the slide that is all the new things. Now, the new things in the budget that we put on the blue and white pages and now here, grouped differently, just so you can see it better, those total
1.3 something million.
$1,310,999. That's a total of all the things that are in that new category. And I think you can see that even if we were to eliminate all of those new things, and I'm certainly not recommending that we do anything like that. On the other hand, you know, look at the bottom line, and right now it's sitting at $2.5 million for the town, to be sure, but that's a very big number. Now, there are unknowns on the town side. There's the meeting coming up on the 26th, the forecast meeting coming up. Next Thursday, on the 22nd, the GIC will meet and establish rates, and we don't know what's going to happen with those. It could, 10% is what the town has budgeted. So if it's something less than 10%, that's good news, and that could impact that bottom line deficit. If it's bigger than 10%, that's terrible news, and that would increase that deficit. We're not really anticipating that there are other things coming along that could be positive in a very significant way. On our side, you know, we might get a couple more retirements, and if we did that, probably for retirements, we might generate with 2 of them maybe $65,000, $70,000 combined in savings. That's the difference between what the person is earning now and what we think we could hire a replacement for. So that could happen. We've got a few more folks that haven't yet let us know about their plans for next year, folks that are on a leave of absence, a 1-year leave. But honestly, in that group, if we had to make a guesstimate, there are, I think, 6 left, and I think that we believe that 4 of those will be people that aren't coming back. However, because those are folks that all have been on a maternity leave, they tend to be younger people, and therefore there isn't a big difference between their salaries, which we budgeted, we assumed everybody was coming back, and their replacement salaries. So there'd be much smaller savings on those folks. John and I are talking about some strategies, one of which we used last year, of taking something that is going to be an added cost that will continue, and that's we haven't even talked to Jamie about how we would do this, but that's for those materials. So that's an expense, and because it's for materials like books or programs or licenses, there's a piece of that really is a one-time expense, the startup expense that you incur when you have to buy all the teacher materials in the first year. So a part of that total of $37,000 is a one-time expense, and a part of that $37,000 is an ongoing expense. So what if we divided it into those components? So Jamie will tell us how much of that is the one-time expense, and we can fill one-time expenses in different ways. And we did that this past year in terms of buying things like texts and materials. So, and that kind of strategy, we would look not just at this list of new things, but to go back through the budget and see if there are other things that are in the base budget that could also be managed in a better way. And I guess in all, and our friends on the town side might not like to hear this, but in all, we want it all. We want the things that we think we need. Doubtful we're going to get all of them. So we'll try to use a variety of different strategies rather than simply cut things off a list until there's nothing left.
But even if we reduce the entire list, we're still $1 million away.
Yeah,
right?
well,
So
we
it's
don't
not
own
as if-
we don't own all of that.
I'm not saying we do. I think the point you're
But-
trying to make is even
yeah.
if we cut all the new requests,
Right.
there's
We
still
still
over $1
would
million.
not be. It still would not be enough. Yeah.
Correct.
Because unlike, I mean, last year, I think right about now, we started talking about, our priorities about different items, but I don't even feel like wasting my breath doing that right now, because we may not be able to have any of the things on the list. So why are we gonna sit around and start talking about which ones are the most important to us when we don't even know if we're gonna be able to have them? I mean, no
And at this
offense,
point
but-
particularly, at some point, we're going to be there.
Hopefully, we'll be talking about it. But for now, it's like, Why?
So in terms of other kinds of strategies, you know, I tend to have the philosophy that I want to keep as many of our programs in place as we can. And if that means compromising and do some of them in stages, or, you know, doing a piece of something rather than nothing, that's the kind of thing I would be likely to recommend. There is, and I think you all can list one or two things on this list of things that I would call low-hanging fruit, things that people have questioned already, that aren't big items, but that together could make a difference. And I think most of them tend to be on this page that, you know, we can cut some of those things without as much impact as cutting people, although there's some personnel on this list. So we might start with that. You know, with respect to the places where there are multiple FTEs there, and I would mention particularly the elementary math tutors and the secondary FTEs, that rather than pick a certain position to say, well, we'll hire a math teacher but not a science teacher, I would think that we should looking at the total number of FTEs we need for the secondary level, possibly making a reduction in that if the need occurs, but then to spread out those other FTEs in May when we know what courses kids have actually opted for and where the biggest need would be. So at this point, I think thinking about strategies and options is important to do. We'll do that. We have looked, as was suggested, at the revolving accounts, and there are different reasons which we willingly share with anyone who wants to take the time and sit down and listen to them, why there are different amounts in some of those accounts. There are reasons for everything, but you know, we always look at every line there. So I guess we hope for the best in terms of the health insurance. Possibly something else will come along. I don't think that there's going to be an appetite at the town level to want to look at risking a bigger number in terms of the state funding, because we just don't know what's going to happen there. We have only the governor's budget, and that's kind of a barometer, but it's not an exact figure. And when you're talking million or more dollars, it's really only personnel that can make significant dents in that amount. So
we are hopeful that the GIC will not increase more than 5%.
That would be great if that happens. That's a big number.
They have reached several consensus where everything is changing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because there is a lot of pressure on them. You know, one is they no longer are going to cancel those plans. Mm-hmm. They actually offer more money on deductibles and things like that. Mm-hmm. You know, how we pay a high number of deductibles, they're making a lot of consensus there. So if they try to increase more than 5%, I think it's going to be a lot of pressure on the community to force them to stay at 5%. So let's hope that, you know, we won't need the 10% that the town is budgeting for. So we can use it for our education.
We hope. Is it, our advisory committee friends who are here, is there any notion of when you'll be able to give us a number of what you're looking at?
I haven't even seen the forecast to it out there.
Oh, okay. Well, it's the, I mean.
I think in 2 words that the actual line want to be live.
Just don't sign the back of it if you win.
Can I ask a question?
Did you not get a copy today, Dan? No?
Sorry?
Did your
It got distributed
to the chair?
leadership, but it
Yeah.
hasn't been distributed.
I see. Okay.
Actually,
What's your question?
We have extra copies if you want.
Yeah. We're always willing to share.
Just to ask a question to our chair and vice chair, but also kind of speak to my right to the advisory committee here tonight. With a unassigned fund balance at 22.31%, is there any appetite for using some of that?
I would say everything's on the table.
Okay, fair enough.
You gotta look at it.
Fair enough.
All right, well then, we will have to do some prioritizing. So, we will, on the 26th, as soon as we get the forecast, and our meeting is at 1 o'clock, I think.
Eliza, did they postpone that to the 27th?
I didn't see anything.
No, it was the
postponed.
26th. Okay, my
Yeah.
calendar has 2 days, so okay, good.
So, we will, yeah, it's at 1 o'clock. So as soon as we get it, we'll email it to everyone, so you have it before the meeting. But, on the 26th, we're gonna have to wrestle through some, identifying some priorities, and we're supposed to take a vote. We can always re-vote again, which we have done the past several years, once we hear back from advisory and the Board of Selectmen where we are with the budget, or with the town budget.
And we'll have an
so-
updated number for our side as well, what may happen over the break or before.
John, could I also ask you the question, what's the timetable, or what's your sense of some response from the Capital Outlay Committee?
I had a conversation with Brendan today.
Today?
He said in a few days he'll have some other information. He just wanted some clarification on a few of the items.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
I think they're presenting the 15th, is that correct, Capital Outlay?
I literally just got an email from Lucy saying it's been pushed out to apparently the 27th.
The selectmen aren't hearing it until
The 20th?
What's a school vacation? No.
Well,
Selectmen's gonna meet, yeah.
Selectmen, yeah.
okay, well,
So Capital Outlay, is going to be when?
Capital Outlay is in selectmen, I meet on the 20th.
20th.
And to the advisory committee on the 27th is the current thinking, but check it, because things are very fluid.
Will that be just the presentation, Donna, or will it, there will not be action at that meeting?
I'm not sure.
well, so they might be wanting to, now I'm assuming, but my assumption would be that the selectmen want to hear what's going on with the 20th.
Yeah.
Make a judgment on
Mhm.
what to move around, or, what are the capital requests, and, do you move something from the reserve fund for capital or not, but, okay, so we got some tough decisions to make, and not fun, but we'll do our best. And come prepared on the 26th with our priorities. So 6.9, to receive notification of the overnight field trip of grade 11 and 12 students to Iceland on July 10th to the 22nd, 2018. So this is a World Challenge opportunity.
Yeah, we've had many of those trips over the years to some very interesting places, including India.
Oops, sorry about that.
Then 6.10, to receive notification of the overnight field trip of Hingham High School music students to Disneyworld in Orlando, March 15th to the 18th, 2018. And every year the music students go on a trip. It's usually to a big city, but I believe Disney World is on a 3 or 4 year cycle.
Yes.
Yeah. So, good luck to them. That'll be
And
fun.
just, sorry,
Yeah.
to clarify, since we're talking about budgets and whatnot, that
Yeah.
these are funded not by the schools. Like, these are funded by students and fundraising that they do, so it does not come out of.
Yes, these are optional trips that students may participate in and families pay for themselves.
Yes.
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yes,
No one
thank
thought we
you.
were using our tax dollars to send people to
Yeah,
Iceland and Disneyworld.
Right. Then 6:11, to receive notification of the resignation of Elizabeth Kurlan, Director of Student Services, effective June 30th, 2018.
Liza, if I may just jump in
Yeah.
just for, I'd like to thank Liz for her help to me over the years as we worked with the Special Education Subcommittee, and I wish her well going forward.
And I was going to say the same thing. She's contributed greatly in her time, and I wish her the best of luck.
Thank
6:12, to receive notification of the resignation of Gregg Wachtelhausen as a Hingham Middle School science teacher, effective June 30th, 2018. He's been on leave of absence for
2
2
years.
years.
Mhm.
Sorry to see Greg go.
Dear German, what does that?
And then 6:13, to receive notification of the resignation of Denise Romanowski, a paraeducator at Plymouth River School, effective December 22nd. Then 48-hour.
Well, I'd just say, perhaps should have mentioned this in the beginning, but we're at the stage in
This
the
right?
principal search that the screening committee has identified 3 semifinalists to come forward.
Yeah.
And so after vacation, we will interview those. Those of us in central office will vote. And all 3 may remain as finalists, or it may be a smaller number. And then we'll go forward with that number of folks on the internal and external visits. So we're on our intended target and timeline and feeling good about that.
Great, good update. Okay, then subcommittee and project reports.
Salary and negotiations, we have finally commenced negotiations with the bus drivers. So that was our last group, and they are underway.
And salary negotiations will be putting together some search firm options that can get moving on that.
Regarding the superintendent
Yeah.
search process.
Did you do in the 48 hours? Did you bring that up? Any items on the 48 hours?
No, just the foster school candidates.
Good, good. So,
Yeah.
I didn't hear, so I'm sorry.
Do anything for long-range planning?
Well, the celestial, what's the word, John? Windows at the high school gym.
I think it's Clever Story.
Oh.
The Clever Story
Clever
windows.
Story windows. Sounds-
Yeah.
sounds-
It took me a while to get that
50
CL
minutes.
thing, and then I thought of Cleveland. I said, it must be Clever Story windows.
We brought a second structural engineer in this past week, and she, along with the salesperson for the material that everybody is using for those replacements, did a real good thorough walk around, and we're waiting for that report.
Oh, good. John, and speaking of that, did you hear from the selectmen of when they're gonna hear that warrant article? Did Tom Mayo get in touch with you about that?
No, I haven't heard from Tom.
Oh, okay. Because I was talking to Mary and they were thinking of doing it this week, and I was like, oh, I think John's gonna not be available.
Right.
And so that message must have gotten back and they're rescheduling, so, okay, I just want to keep a heads up on, they're gonna wanna have that presentation done, so.
I specifically asked to Aileen's, I was just thinking as I glanced over to Aileen, Aileen's point at the last meeting about what kind of damage or what kind of increased cost might we incur if we do nothing. I very clearly asked that issue to be addressed in the incoming report.
Great. Okay.
Community outreach, we finally have our statement of work with Stacker signed this week, so I would say there's more to come after the break. And then our next meeting is March 5th. Yes, March 5th at 9 o'clock in the morning.
And Cynthia's not here, but we did just schedule a policy subcommittee meeting for the sometime that week of March 4th. I can't recall off the top of my head. But we did just schedule another policy subcommittee.
Yeah, I can't remember the date either. I think it was March 6th.
Yeah, I know it's that week.
Okay, all right. Okay, and
It is March 6th.
special education has not met. We should probably try and get to some of these outreach meetings. Jamie, can you send us the schedule of when the parent?
It's Thursday at 7 is the last one.
Oh.
The first one was today at 12:30, and then Thursday at 7 in this room will be the second and final parent forum.
And it's a good thing there are none on Wednesday, because, you know, that is Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Mark it on your calendar.
And the CPAC meeting was supposed to be Valentine's Day, but they postponed it, so.
Yes. So people have heart, that's good to know.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, so, oh, and just on community outreach and for the community, we put on the school committee website a summary of the steps on the superintendent search process, so if anyone has any questions. That's a summary of what was discussed at the January 31st. And that's it.
Look at.
I did
Thank
it.
you. I have to be back at the seminar tomorrow, and I have to get up at 5:30 again tomorrow morning, and I told Liza, I said if it goes past 10:30, I might just have to leave to go home.
Perfect. So I will accept the motion to adjourn at, and it's, it's 10:31.
I would so move.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
The meeting is adjourned.